I'm proud to say this. I've never met a woman suffer from a broken heart because she's stronger than that. She knows she's resilient, she's strong, she's emotionally prepared for all the downhills and all the rejections of life. Men are vulnerable, volatile, and absolutely emotionally weak to handle rejection. And so they're all suffering from heartbreak, hearing sad songs. Do you know 9 out of 10 men stare at themselves in the mirror more than women do? Have you noticed how many men keep touching their hair when they look at the mirror? It's almost like they want to reassure that they still have it on their heads. I unabashedly, unapologetically, and absolutely outstandingly loved Dhurandhar. I saw all 3 hours and 34 minutes of it with awe. I actually was not at all offended by the politics of the film. This generation apparently is very intensely always in love. It's not a frivolous generation as we know it, we know them as a left and right swiping generation. It's not actually true. They intensely fall in love. And all songs that do well are heartbreak songs. Nobody's celebrating love. We are all celebrating tragedy, in songs. If you go to the Spotify top 50, there are 40 heartbreak songs of the top 50 that are there. I remember when I made a film called Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna, and there are people, and that film was about infidelity. And there were people who walked up to me with anger and said, I hated your movie. So I said, you can't hate something so much unless it hits home. So I'm like, what's up in your life that made you want to hate Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna so much? All well in your relationship? You should either be loved or hated. What you should never, ever face is indifference. Imagine when no one talks about you. How terrible is that? People are saying, I identify as a broccoli or I'm a furry. And I'm like, I think a bit much. How do I address you as a broccoli?
Which is what I was going
to what do I say? Welcome to my salad? I don't know. We don't realize what a selfish emotion love is. Even our expression is, I love you. It's all about I. What about, do you love me?
After Rocky and Rani, when is Karan Johar coming back to the movies? When are you going to direct your next? He vibes with Ori and drops wisdom like Javed Akhtar sir. Slays a Bollywood party and holds his own at Cannes. And still narrates India's story at Davos like it's second nature. The man who made India dream in slow motion rain scenes. And then reminded us that life is Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum. Wait, I said, knew it. Shh, guys. Okay, I'm going to wait for you to be silent. Okay. His dharma is not just content, but shapes our subculture. He taught us what love is from Kuch Kuch Hota Hai to now tu meri, main tera, tu meri feels. Gives us family entertainers interspersed with values through Rocky or Rani conversations. And where it matters most, Sher-Shah level truth. He broke stereotypes with Dostana, made therapy dinner talk with Dear Zindagi, and told people across generations, Kal ho na ho, but live fully right now. But for me, the real flex, he's always razi to mentor, amplify, and do anything that makes society a little more shandar. A cultural force with a conscience, always low-key or affirming, but high-key nation building, and soon, I'm sure, will return homebound with an Oscar for India. A son, father, filmmaker, author, and host. Join me as we welcome the bodaciously versatile, the perspicaciously relevant, and the irreverently intellectual, my personal role model, and the only person that I yet get nervous to take an interview of or even to talk to. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Mr. Bollywood himself, Karan Johar.
तुमने न जाने क्या सपने दिखाए तुम पास आए यूं मुस्कुराए.
Firstly, thank you for doing this.
No, thank you. And thank you. This is such an infectious room. My God. Wow. How many of you are there? 3,500. What?
3,500, 120 schools.
Wow.
120 schools and colleges, and then this being sent to 100,000 schools across the country.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Rishabh. Thank you for having me here today. And congratulations on 15 years of Ayman. What a glorious achievement.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Let me start off by saying something whether I don't know whether you heard it in the wings or not. We've hosted 32 heads of nations till now, and we've hosted Nobel laureates, and we've hosted many a dignitary at Ayman. But there's one reason that I get nervous in front of him, and that is because he's my role model right from school to college, and then finally to be able to sit and have conversations like this. Honestly, it's a privilege and an honor to be able to be in conversation, Karan. So,
Oh, thank you. You're just kind, Rishabh. You're just kind.
But let me start with the first question. My role model sitting in front of me, who was your role model?
So I think that when you say role model, like the word that comes to my mind is inspiration.
Correct.
So there have been many that have inspired me from my formative years. I grew up with stars in my eyes, obsessed with Hindi cinema. I grew up watching like the greats, the masters, vintage Raj Kapoor, Guru Dutt, Yash Chopra.
Right.
But mainly, what led me to all these filmmakers actually was one voice, the voice of Lata Mangeshkar. I used to listen to her music and I was obsessed. My entire childhood, I think I can dedicate to the magical, majestic, magnificent voice of Lata Mangeshkar. I still believe that that one voice has not just like, I think, led an entire nation into the world of Indian music. But still that voice is so resonant. We don't realize that her rendition of "Ae Mere Watan Ke Logo" or "Lag Ja Gale" is embedded in our DNA, you know, and actually that, she would be in many ways my role model.
And like you rightly said, that a generation's grown up listening to her, and yet is listening to her even still.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to understand, and before we get to the questions, is many congratulations on Homebound. It's made it to the top 15, as everybody knows, and we are hoping that you get the Oscar.
Thank you. I mean, really, the journey of Homebound has been overwhelming, but like literally the night that the shortlist was coming out, I now know what all of you must feel before your exam results, because it took me back to my board exams. You know, when you were waiting, like that the results are out, results are out, results are out. Literally, it felt like that, because from 86 countries, we had to come down to 15 countries. And that was a shortlist that was announced Pacific time at about 11:30, which was about 1 o'clock our time in the night. We were all sitting refreshing the page of the Oscar site, and literally when it dropped, and I was like, we were on a group chat with me and Neeraj Khevan, the director, Ishan, Vishal, Ankur, Apurva, like everybody who's in charge of like this entire campaign. And I just said, the last thing I said is, oh my God, if we don't make it, just don't write it. Like, you know, break it softly, because it was something that we were so anxious about. And literally when the shortlist came out and we read India, you know, on the 15, like, I think it was a goose like bump moment for all of us. We all screamed into voice notes loudly. Like, there were a series of screams on that group chat where everyone was like, ah, like we made it. Like, yeah. And now from 15, the big fear and anxiety is like, can we make it to the top 5? And if that does happen, it'll be after 25 years. Because the last time we made it to the top 5 was Lagan, which was in 2001. So yeah, it's a stressful uphill task, but we're just going to do what we can.
We're waiting for the board results, and we hope that he's the student of the year.
Oh God.
But I must ask you this. What will happen if, what is the first thing that you will do? Like, suppose one were to top after an examination, then one has a celebration that is planned. Is there anything that you have in mind as soon as you win the Oscar? What's the first thing that you're going to do?
Winning is is dur ki baat. I'm even saying a nomination is a win. If we make it to the top 5, I think I might start weeping copiously. I think I'll cry for an hour first. I don't know about the celebration. I just think I'll cry. I think I won't stop crying because for me, it's been such a massive, massive item, or rather point in my bucket list of achievement. I have like my own manifestation board, and I think all of us should have that board where we put up and feel like we must put up what we really want out of our lives. And I think we're old enough, even in this room, if I might say so, to have that manifestation board where you put up, and I think winning or just being nominated is a big win in itself, and that is very high up on my manifestation board. So I'll feel like so blessed that some dreams and impossible dreams can be true.
And an impossible dream is already come true with the nomination, and we only wish you strength to strength. And,
Thank you.
And then now to jump back to the conversation. But I had to take the detour because of the big news that was there.
Yeah.
And I was very excited when I saw it as well, because I know what it means for you and what it will do for the country.
Yeah.
Winning an Oscar for the country is something that you had once spoken about, saying, I want to win the Oscar for India.
Yeah.
And I know that it will inspire a generation of filmmakers in the country once you come back with it.
Absolutely.
But, Karan, if I may, there is a huge difference between role models and real models. One of the things that I see today is that it's very easy to be a real model. It's very easy to go viral. Virality has also become, you say the right things, you say it with the right cameras, and there is a chance you'll go viral.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference between role models and real models is what I believe. There are certain values that role models carry, which are timeless, and sometimes real models don't necessarily showcase the same. So to that end, for a generation that has grown up on real models, how does one choose a role model?
When you say real model, if you take it in the virality sense, then it's like a result of doom scrolling. How can anyone be a real model? Like, it's just ridiculous. Something like, what is a reel? A reel, if you just go by its definition, is like 1 minute or 30 seconds and you swipe to the next. A role model has to live in your soul and heart forever. You have to wake up with that person as an inspiration on a daily basis. So that means longevity, and what stays in your emotional ecosystem for a long time has to therefore be a role model. A real model is seasonal. It's going to come, it's going to go. People will achieve something, say something, become huge, get the followers, garner that kind of viewership, and then you've moved on to the very next person immediately, if not the very next day, then next week for sure. Role model is consistency, it's longevity. It's somebody who's worked tirelessly, effortlessly, and passionately to achieve what they have. Those are the people that you follow. Those are the journeys you emulate. Those are literally the trajectory that you want to kind of have in your own zone of life. I don't understand a real model. I don't understand, I don't want to understand. It's a result of what we do when we have nothing better to do. We scroll. And we do that a lot. Like, I find myself doom scrolling all the time, and it gets me so annoyed that I want to do a digital detox at least twice a month so that I'm not obsessing about these reels. Like, I go crazy in the night. Like, sometimes I feel I'm sleeping with just garbage in my head. And algorithms make you see more of the nonsense you're consuming. So it keeps coming back to you. I believe we must all have role models. I believe we must have role models that are not seasonal, that are achievers for generations. And those have to be the people that you have to have as dreams, as manifestations, as inspirations.
And therefore, real models, like you rightly said, are seasonal. And would it be correct in saying that real models are like nanoships and role models are like relationships? And that you want to find the right role model?
I don't understand what a nanoship is. I know what it means. I know what it means. A nanoship or a situationship, all this, I suppose, one hears of, one talks about, like one the generations discuss it. Yeah, I come from where like it's either a relationship or it isn't. What is a nanoship? That's a hookup, right? What is a nanoship? I don't understand it. It's like a relationship that is not a relationship, but it's for a tiny duration of time, or you're describing something else altogether. I'm not sure. But like, to me, I come from a certain kind of an old world way of thinking that if you're in it, you should be in it to win it. And that is emotionally as well. And if you're not in it, you're not in it. And I mean, I think then that's a fling. That's what we used to call what a nanoship is now known as.
And therefore, there are these timeless values, and it's great that it's coming from you, because you're somebody that you saw the applause, the thunderous applause, and the number of times I had to tell them to be quiet as I was introducing you. Yeah. But you appealed to the principal and also to the student who is going to be watching this and is watching this. And therefore, I'm glad that you mentioned about that as an attribute. But there are certain values that I attribute to you. If you were kind enough in order to attribute these values to somebody from the cinema ecosystem or just generally from public service overall. Hard work.
Who would I dedicate heartbreak to?
Hard work.
Hard work?
Hard work.
Oh, I heard heartbreak. I was like, I was going to attribute that to myself. Hard work. So I don't think I've seen anyone more hardworking in my journey of cinema than Shah Rukh Khan. I have literally never met a more hardworking person in the entire industry. His achievement is a result of not just his talent, his immense intelligence, his incredible charm, his presence, his aura. All of that is immensely critical to his overall image building as a mega movie star. But it's a lot to do with his hard work. Like, he can work 36 hours a day and we have only 24 hours a day. He has that level of hard work in him.
Oh, lovely. Humility.
Mr. Bachchan.
Honesty.
Amir Khan.
Wittiness.
Wittiness? That would again be Shah Rukh Khan. I think he thinks literally he's way ahead of you, like in terms of like a punchline, a joke, a comment, a repartee. Like Shah Rukh Khan, nobody can like match. And the other person, Javed Akhtar.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And benevolence.
Benevolence. To find a movie star who's benevolent, or anyone in the industry.
I would say Karan Johar,
No.
because you've been far too kind with both your time.
Benevolence. I've met many very kind people and very benevolent people. But if I had to just zero it to like one individual, it's a tough one though, because it's a quality that's rare. And it's rarely put out there, but like, I would say that it would be my closest friend, Manish Malhotra, and I'll tell you why. He's an incredibly benevolent person because he pays it forward. It's how he deals with the business. He deals with the industry. He's been in the business 35 years, and his benevolence is not known, you know, because the glamour and fashion take over, but he's an immensely benevolent man.
Of course, like I said at the outset, that all of these qualities are something that I see in you, including the hard work, which he said that, you know, Mr. Khan puts in 36 hours in a 24-hour day, but I've seen him, you know, at the occasions when one talks to him, he's tending to a phone call by somebody else. He's also responding to text messages, giving instructions to someone, and he's doing this relentlessly from wee hours in the morning to 1 a.m. in the night. So the idea that there's a lot to learn from him, and of course the magnanimity of him giving examples of other people. But one of the things that I'm most concerned, and because principals do speak about it as well, is that the value system is fast changing, and a lot of the values that are fast changing is also attributed to cinema and to OTT. Today, the shows that we grew up with, or the movies that we grew up with, vis-a-vis what Gen Z and Gen Alpha grows up with, is very different. There are shows such as Traitors and OTT which shape youth narratives differently. Now, what role does a filmmaker have when it comes to the fact that he or she knows that, or they know that the audience that is consuming this content is also going to be people who are below the age of 18. Because at the end of the day, of course, we can put an 18 plus and we can say that this is only for adults, but this it's going to eventually come to people who are going to consume it through OTT. So what role does a filmmaker have in a society that is largely on OTT as well?
So it's a double-edged sword, Rishabh. One is most of our thinking time goes in catering to the generation. So shaping them, let me be honest, sometimes is secondary. For a filmmaker, mainstream filmmaker, everyone is telling us what the youth need in terms of music, content. They like front-footed energy. Today we hear words like testosterone, alpha male, like volatile emotions, emotions on your sleeve. Nobody likes subtlety. Everybody's like, this generation apparently is very intensely always in love. It's not a frivolous generation as we know it, like we know them as a left and right swiping generation. It's not actually true. They intensely fall in love. And all songs that do well are heartbreak songs. Nobody's celebrating love. We are all celebrating tragedy, like in songs. If you go to the Spotify top 50, there are 40 heartbreak songs of the top 50 that are there. That speaks about the generation consumption, right? So half the time, I think, goes in like, how do we cater to them? Shaping them is going to come after. Because the movies that we have made to shape generations don't give us footfalls. And that's what I said is a double-edged sword. Because we are mainstream filmmakers. We have to balance commerce and art. So we have to make sure that our work is also commercially viable while we want to be as artistic and as cinematic and, of course, push the boundaries. But if I'll give you a list of 10 movies that have done that, they haven't done the numbers, but movies that have catered to the generation with front-footed energy, great thumping music, like literally high testosterone, those are making hundreds of crores at the box office. So where does that leave us then, Rishabh? Should we be shaping a generation or should we be catering to the generation is the big question. And then there are those filmmakers with a deep amount of consciousness, like a Neeraj Ghewan, who actually doesn't want to cater but wants to shape. And then there is filmmakers and studio heads who just want to cater. So there will always be a balance of two kinds of filmmakers. There will be the Shazia Iqbals and the Neeraj Ghewans and the Zoya Akhtars and the many filmmakers who will want to shape generations, shape their way of thinking, want to take them into positivity, talk about social consciousness, talk about elements and facts that plague society. And those may not do the large numbers, but they will relentlessly tell those stories. To every animal, there will be a Homebound. To every Dhadak 2, there will be a Durandar. There will always be a balance, and I believe that it should exist. To every solid, conscious filmmaker, there will be a mainstream voice. And I think the two should coexist.
Why can't we have all like Rocky and Rani? And I'm sure all of us have seen the movie. And we have. And, it's a commercial blockbuster. You're touching upon so many issues in the film. So is there, I understand the yin and yang. I also do understand the fact that, there will be cinema that will be made, which will be like Durandar.
Right.
And like Animal. And there is space for that. But also because so much of society is shaped by cinema, and especially at this young, impressionable age, would you encourage more filmmakers to look at...
Look, I find it impossible not to touch upon certain facts. Like I'm a filmmaker who directed a film like My Name is Khan, which addressed the misinterpretation of a religion. Rocky Aur Rani is an immensely, proudly feminist film. It speaks about, breaking gender stereotypes and so much more. And I believe very much that you can strike that balance, but it's very tough, because you're combating a totally different climate. In the very same year, the bigger hits, bigger than even mine, were Animal and Gaddar. It was not Rocky Aur Rani. We were in the top 5 hits of the year, but we were not the number 1, 2, and 3. There was Jawan, there was Pathaan, there was Animal, there was Gaddar, and then there was Rocky Aur Rani. So in the pecking order as a studio head, sometimes you're like, hey, I want to be the number 1 film of the year as well, because I need to make that money for my company so I can make many more Homebounds. So you see, it's a double-edged sword. The more money I make through high testosterone cinema, if at all you can call it that. That way I can make Homebound and not care about the profitability, but make it really for society. So it's, as I said, we're constantly trying to kind of, like balance inherently in your organization what you should do and what you have to do.
Correct. Like one has to balance in life just generally as well. But between political ideologies, also between choices in life and the kind of cinema that you make. But there's a movie called Dhurandhar, which has just come out recently. And there was somebody from the fraternity, Hrithik Roshan, who made a statement saying that he loves the crafts, but doesn't agree with the politics. What are your thoughts about the movie and the fact that now movies sometimes have a political undertone to it?
Look, I unabashedly, unapologetically, and absolutely outstandingly loved Dhurandhar. I saw all 3 hours and 34 minutes of it with awe because I loved the craft of the filmmaker. I loved the storytelling. I loved the way he divided it into chapters. I loved that the gaze was more internal, and it wasn't against, it was first speaking about the politics, in its own way. I actually was not at all offended by the politics of the film. I know where it was heading. I know some people could agree, disagree, and that should be cinema. So when Hrithik writes that, I completely respect that he has an opinion that he's put out there. Full power to him and all respect to him that he actually wrote it. But he also appreciated the film for its craft and cinematicness. But he put out his point, whereas I'm somebody who loved the film unabashedly, and I never went back with any kind of, I was not offended with any ideological issue in the film. I watched it for the craft, the cinema aspect of it, and I absolutely loved it. And I felt like Aditya Dhar is a unique voice. And I really feel he's emerged as a strong, unique voice. When you saw Vanga Reddy, Sandeep Vanga Reddy, I felt he has a unique way of telling a story. And it's got so much to do with his craft. As a filmmaker, Rishabh, I can't not see the craft because I'm really watching another filmmaker's work and feeling in awe and inspired and also feeling like, oh, am I capable of this? That's the first question you ask when you see something solid. And I realized that, there are lots I'm capable of and lots I'm incapable of. And I think that the craft of Dhurandhar is what I went home with. And of course, the immensely powerful performances.
So the craft and the performances are more important than the political overtones or the undertones that are there in a movie, and that's okay.
And I really believe that the filmmaker had a very interesting gaze.
Understood.
And I felt he went internal into that world for a reason. And he did it, in fact, I walked out feeling it was a nuanced film.
Yes. Correct. And the best thing about you is that you respect everybody's opinions. And the fact that
and I feel, what is art if it doesn't lead to conversation?
Absolutely.
And I feel like a film like Dhurandhar has led to so much prime-time conversation. Absolutely. Every night you switch on the news and we're talking about Dhurandhar. I mean, that means it's leading to conversation.
Absolutely.
For or against, every piece of art must motivate conversation. And that's what the film has done in abundance.
No, absolutely. And just right before you, we had the co-founder of Infosys, S.D. Shibulal sir, and he said there is something to learn from everyone. Yeah. Irrespective of their personal beliefs and what they think of a particular situation, there's something that one can pick up from any person per se. But one of the things that I must ask you for the students and also for us internally, you're somebody who is massively loved, but I've seen you being massively trolled. I've seen that on very many occasions, people are very unkind to you. Now, when sometimes it happens at the organization that somebody says an unkind word to us, or when it happens at a young, impressionable age when you are in school and somebody says something which is untoward, then to deal with that kind of criticism is difficult. And I've seen you resilient, and I've seen you battle it in a way which is very admirable. And therefore, for me and for everybody who's sitting out here, how do you handle criticism?
The important thing for you to realize is when the criticism coming your way is actually coming from a place of amazing analysis. When there's a critic who writes about your work and has not appreciated your work, and you know the critic, he or she, comes from a solid place in their heart, that they came in to watch your film wanting to love it, and then they didn't love it, and then they wrote a critical piece about your film, and you have to realize that, okay, this person means well, did not like my film, and I must appreciate the criticism for it. And if there is any criticism, I should learn from it, and know that this criticism is coming from a solid place. It's not coming from a place of bias. It's not coming from a place of being vindictive, vicious, or like unnecessarily negative. So the first thing is, when you analyze where the criticism is coming from, and that's what I do. 95% of the trolling is from faceless, nameless, and pointless people, okay? Mostly, they are unhappy, many a times unemployed, many a times therefore frustrated, angry, bitter, and all that negativity makes them want to troll you. Now, what do you feel? Should you be offended and upset and humiliated and insulted, or should you feel pity? I choose the latter. I feel pity for anyone who trolls me, because I feel two things, pity and I feel self-important. One is, I feel pitiful towards this person who's probably struggling through the beats of his or her life to the extent that they are being so negative about me. They're insulting me, my way of talking, speaking, walking. They've come down to insulting my mother, my kids, my ecosystem, my family, my world. You are so unhappy and so bitter that you are taking it out on me like this. That means what I should feel is actually nothing but pity for you. Then I should feel very important as well. Because I'm like, one thing you must know. You should either be loved or hated. What you should never ever face is indifference. Imagine when no one talks about you. How terrible is that? I don't want to ever face indifference. And then there are ways of looking at it. A very famous song will tell you, "Kuch to log kahenge, logo ka kaam hai kehna, chodo bekar ki baatein, beet na jaye rehna." And I agree with that also. But I look at it, Rishabh, with a very simple lens. I look at anyone who says the most ridiculous things about me, insults me, humiliates me, trolls me. I only feel, and I say this literally, and I swear on everything holy to me, I only feel pity. And I feel like, poor fellow or poor lady, like they must be so unhappy to waste all their energy into negativity. How unhappy they must be. And there may be reasons for their unhappiness, which I'm feeling bad for.
So the next time somebody comes to you and the criticism is not valid and it comes from a place that is not well, is not well-meaning per se, then you know essentially what to do. You need to follow the Karan Johar way and feel pity for that person, and of course the fact that you should feel very happy about the fact that you are so very relevant that they're talking about you. And that's the best way to deal with this.
Anyone who walks up to you, I remember when I made a film called Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna, and there are people, and that film was about infidelity. And there were people who walked up to me with anger and said, "I hated your movie." So I said, you can't hate something so much unless it hits home. So I'm like, what's up in your life that made you want to hate Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna so much? All well in your relationship? Is what I said to most people. And many a time I met with like a lot of shock and surprise because I think I hit a nerve. You can never hate somebody or anything so much unless it's actually struck some chord within yourself. And I believe that that's what happens with most trolls, is that they're affected by what you're doing. They can't bear, either you're too happy for them, or you're too successful for them, or you're too good looking for them, or you're too indifferent to their criticism that can annoy them. And that's why you should feel pity.
And polarization of any sense is what I've always felt is not good. Whether it is in terms of ideologies, whether it is in terms of opinions, any sort of extremity is also not something that's good. But trolling used to happen in society for many a reason and in schools also. One of the reasons which used to happen is because of individual sexual preferences.
Yes.
And thankfully that has been decriminalized thanks to the man who's sitting on the first row and our next speaker, the 50th Chief Justice, Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud.
How are you? It's such a pleasure to see you, sir. My God. You know what an incredible fan I am of yours, sir, and your tremendous achievement, what you have done for society. Please give it up for this gentleman, I think, who has literally, like changed the fabric of this society. I have to come out to you, sir, and take your hand. No. I cannot tell you, sir, what you have done and what you helmed and what you led has changed the fabric of India and our society in so many ways. I represent millions of people when I say, sir, that we are so honored to breathe the same air as you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that beautiful and very appropriate gesture. Because it's very true. We're very lucky to breathe the same air that he breathes. But you've also touched upon this in many of your movies. In Rocky and Rani, Ranveer Singh's character, you made him do Kathak. Whilst gender expression should be fluid, my question, Karan, is how should one approach the subject of gender expression in school? Both from the perspective of the student and the principal.
I think the first thing is that we have to actually start breaking very simple stereotypes. And I won't talk to principals of institutions or to students, but what I will say that what I did as a parent is what I think we all need to start doing. I was blessed with a boy and girl, twins. The simple things that I started doing is we don't realize that what we say at home actually can be deeply impressionable. We say simple things like all the time you hear it like, don't cry like a girl. Now, what does that mean? That means you're making a divide, that a boy is not supposed to cry, not supposed to express his feelings, but a girl apparently can. And it's okay. Now, that's the first mistake we make. Then, oh, I bought a pink t-shirt. That's for the girl. The boy can't wear pink. Who says that? A boy can wear pink, a girl can wear pink, both can wear blue. Football is meant for the boy and dance is meant for the girl. No, both my children play football. They both do taekwondo and they both dance. So there's simple things that I imbibed in the upbringing and raising of my children is what I think any head of an institution must encourage. We divide because we have been raised with a certain kind of consciousness. We have been saying things that are inappropriate and incorrect without realizing it. We are always telling a girl how to sit, never telling a boy how to sit. We are always overtly protective to our girl child, as we must be, but we must also raise our boys in a way, from a very young age, learn to respect women, and how we treat them at home comes from equality. The moment you start treating a boy differently, he lands up feeling superior for no reason. Because all the no's are reserved, like for the girls, and all the yeses for the boys, and that's just not the way. Have you ever met a woman with a broken heart? All the ashiks of the world are all men. And I'll tell you why. Because men traditionally are not used to being said no to. Whereas a girl from a very young age, you say, sit like this, walk like this, talk like this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. You don't say any of that to the boy. Because apparently he is superior and is meant to be he can come home a little later, he can wear any kind of garment and you'll not question it. But a girl is so used to hearing no that she has built a resilience and she's stronger than men, and therefore she can take rejection because she's from a very young age, it's in the fabric, it's in her DNA. To be said no to, whereas men are not used to being said no to. So they can't bear it. So the moment when a woman tells you, I don't love you, you go crazy. So all heartbreak songs are led by men. You know, and I believe I have never met, and I'm proud to say this, I've never met a woman suffer from a broken heart because she's stronger than that. She knows she's resilient, she's strong, she's emotionally prepared for all the downhills and all the rejections of life. Men are vulnerable, volatile, and absolutely emotionally weak to handle rejection. And so they're all suffering from heartbreak, hearing sad songs, growing a stubble and walking around like unhappy. And I'm like, all women you'll never see a woman like that. So I believe, Rishabh, that from a very young age, you have to firstly say very simple, equal things to the boy child and the girl child. And that's how I'm raising my two children. I do not make any differences between them. From the very young age, I'm like, you'll see my son do exactly the same things that my daughter does. And I do not make those. And I've trained my house. Because they used to say things, my mom included, comes from a different school of thought. So she was to say things and I used to and now I've tried to kind of make them not use certain words, which we frivolously throw around, Like my kids, I'm proud to tell you, say plus size. They don't say fat. You know, they say visually challenged, they don't say blind. They say vertically challenged. They don't say like, you know, when height is an impediment for whatever reason. I'm trying very hard to inculcate that value system in my household. And that's what I encourage all institutions to do.
And what you just mentioned is very sensitive, and which is something that builds empathy amongst a generation, which is very true. But also then I do see sometimes that there is too much of performative politics in language. Do you think that there is a theater of overcorrection when it comes to things such as pronouns and issues such as that? Or do you think that it is evolution of language and that is something that is only to respect people and therefore we should respect it?
I think we have to respect people for their choices. If they don't want to be slotted as he, him, or she, her, and they want to be addressed as they, them, then that is their prerogative. It is their choice. It is their, as I said, their demand of their identity, and we have to adhere to it. We have to conform to it. We cannot confront it, and we cannot ridicule it, and we cannot joke about it. I'm sorry, it is not okay. Yes, you have to make the change for yourself. It is difficult to kind of change the sentence constructions because of how you have been calling a man or woman in your head in perception. Make a little bit of an effort because that's what they want, pun intended. And that's what you do. It is my, yes, of course, now when I'm saying, people are saying I identify as a broccoli or I'm a furry, and I'm like, now that's now I think a bit much. Like,
Correct.
how do I address you as a broccoli?
Which
like,
is what I was going to...
Like, you know, what do I say? Welcome to my salad? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how I would talk to a person who says I identify as a broccoli. So that is a bit much.
Which is why I said is a theater of overcorrection then that has somehow crept in. Respecting people for a particular pronoun is very important, and I think that is evolution of language.
Yes.
But what I was hinting towards as well is the salad and the broccoli cut that one is now used to
No,
seeing.
and did you know there was a phenomena called furries?
No, I
So there are, if you look them up, it's called the people who identify them as four-legged animals.
Oh, goodness.
They do. They want to be cats and leopards and tigers and they want to be identified as that. And they wear that costume and walk around. And by the way, they are called a community called furries, F-U-R-R-Y-S. And now, how can I talk to somebody who's on his or her fours? And like, it's a bit difficult to have a conversation, you know? You can pet them maybe, but you can't talk to them.
We already had the movie Animal, and we also have animals, so perhaps we don't
So
need
I'm like,
these animals.
My
Yes.
problem is when you
Yes.
stretch that and go then beyond the realm of even acceptance. Because
Correct.
that is like, then it's borderline ridiculousness. So that I'm not sure I have any understanding of. Again, I don't want to, as I said, it's everyone's personal right and prerogative, but I have a deep level of like problem dealing with the circumstance if I had to face it. I haven't met a broccoli as yet so far, so I've not had that problem.
So, coming to the other aspect of what I wanted to touch upon, which is in terms of love. A generation's grown up watching your films, and you've taught the nation the meaning of love. From when I saw Pyar Dosti Hai to essentially today's films that are there. What is Karan Johar's definition of love? And in that light, how important is it for a Gen Z or a millennial today to get married? Because Jaya Bachchan ma'am just recently in an interview with Barkha Dutt said that she wouldn't want Navya to get married. So we start with your definition of love, and then if you can touch upon marriage.
Love. So while I might have platformed love in my cinema, I think it came from my love for cinema. And all the love that I showed is the love I've seen in previous films or filmmakers' versions of love. I could go on and sound like a Hallmark card and talk to you about love being companionship, love being compatibility, love being friendship first. And like Upella, this is the first step of love is friendship. And all this is bookish, textual, hallmarky. All of this is, all of it can sound like you've read it before, you've heard it before, and these are pearls that are given to us. Love is to me, the feeling of love has to be more about, we don't realize what a selfish emotion love is. Even our expression is, I love you. It's all about I. What about, do you love me? Is the first thing that we need to first know. That love is not just about I, it's about us. And I feel love has to be a combined emotion of two people. And that's the first thing you need to know. Don't make it about yourself. It has to be a decision made between two people. And you have to understand that love means that you cannot function without that unit. That a part of you will feel incomplete without that unit. So love is about completing certain gaps in your ecosystem. And when that person completes those gaps and those empty spots, those vacant spots, those lonely, empty moments in your life, then you know somewhere that's love. And that could be, my definition of love is really about somebody who can come and fill in the pauses, gaps, holes in your emotional ecosystem. To me, that's love. Marriage. To many, I have said, please don't get married because I know their personality type. To many, I feel need marriage because they need that constant support of a partner. So I think it's different for different people. There are many I've advised, please do not get married. You're not meant for the institution. Because you don't understand it, you don't comprehend it, you will not be able to kind of... And I don't understand what an open marriage is, for example, because I'm like, if it's an open marriage, then why are you married? Be open on your own. Then why are you in this marriage? Marriage is a very sacred institution. I think we have to respect it. Please don't be married if it's not for you. So I think it's an individual choice. For that matter, I say, why marriage? Even relationships. You don't need to be in a relationship because society tells you should have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a lover. Not at all. You can have 10 lovers if you wish. You can have 20 equations, nanoships like you call them. You don't need to be in a committed relationship. Be in one if you believe you can honor that commitment. Otherwise, don't be in it. So I always say it's an individual choice.
Or you could even be self-partnered. And that could also be something that...
Like me. Like I've partnered with myself for very many years and I'm very happy. I'm absolutely, unabashedly in a beautiful, committed relationship with myself.
And now that deserves a round of applause.
And there are many advantages of being in a relationship with yourself. You don't cheat on yourself. There's no question of breaking up with yourself. So it's a long-term relationship.
And it's the easiest to look into a mirror and say, I love you.
Even if you don't love yourself, you don't have to love yourself. I don't necessarily look at the mirror and say, I love you. I don't have a lot of self-love in that way, and that's something I'm working on even in therapy. It's something that I find myself always questioning myself rather than loving myself. And that's okay. It's part of my journey as a human being. But I choose at this juncture of my life to be single because I feel like I'm an only child and a single parent, and I feel like I have so much love that completes me, and I feel like right now my focus is parenting and being a parent even to my parent, because now she's 83 years old and she needs now that parental love, and I live with her and my twins, and I feel like these are my relationships. So I choose not to be in a romantic relationship at this point. But never say never. Who knows what is to come?
Never say never.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I'm guilty of is looking at the mirror every time I pass one, the little bit of narcissism. But one of the things that I get often from a younger generation saying, Rishabh, you're trying to vibe too hard. Don't try so hard. Be like Karan
Have
sir.
you also, just to say this, and sorry to break your thought, have you realized that this is another stereotype that is not true? We associate vanity with women a lot. When you say mirror, do you know 9 out of 10 men stare at themselves at the mirror more than women do? And men have a tendency, because maybe genetically we are not blessed with hair, everyone keeps, have you noticed how many men keep touching their hair when they look at the mirror? It's like almost like they want to reassure that they still have it on their heads. And it's a very man thing to do. It's not, I'll never see a woman stare at a mirror as much as I see men stare at themselves.
Guilty.
And I'm like, many a time they're just checking their hair.
Yeah. Completely guilty to that. I don't know how many boys out here are also equally guilty, but they are. But one of the things that I've seen you is effortlessly vibe with generations across. And I've seen you with Shabana ma'am, where she speaks about you, and I've seen Janvi and Ananya speak about you. And I see that everybody in a way relates to you. How do you vibe across generations? And also, how should young people get taken seriously? When I started IIMN 15 years ago, I was half my size. Therefore, to be taken seriously by anybody back then and even to date is a difficult proposition. So what advice would you give to a young person who's starting out as to how to get taken seriously? And second, how do you vibe with generations across?
There are two very simple things, Rishabh. I can only speak from my experience. I don't talk down to a younger person, and I don't overtly talk up to an older person. You know, respect is another thing. You have to give respect to someone older than you. But you don't necessarily have to be talking to them in a way where you feel like they know better than you, because they may not. So don't overtly talk up to somebody older than you, or don't talk down to somebody younger than you, because I believe whenever I meet a individual of whatever age, I always like to make sure that we're on the same plane and playing field. Like, I know a lot less than a younger person about so many things, including pop culture. And yet I feel when I talk to a senior person, if I sit in awe and respect, the conversation is not going to flow. So somewhere, even they want to be treated a little bit like in a normal person, and not necessarily like a senior citizen, you know? So when I meet Shabana ji, for example, I'll talk to her like I talk to Ananya Pandey. You know, I don't need to, because everybody wants to be treated in a way, like it's sometimes, you know, there are times I've had to pinch myself when I'm talking to Ananya or to Janvi, or for that matter, sometimes my children, and I'm like, I'm having such a free-flowing conversation about relationships and love and about so many things, and I'm like, she's 30 years younger than me, and I'm like still behaving. Similarly, when I talk to Shabana ji, I chat about sometimes really frivolous, stupid, silly things, and I know she enjoys it, because I'm not talking up to her all the time. I'm just talking in a way where you can make sure that the individual you're speaking to, you're not putting them on a pedestal or lowering them. You're just talking to them as equals. And they enjoy it, you enjoy it, and you learn so much from that interaction.
I hope you're enjoying this one.
I never talk. Whenever I've met you, you're so much younger than me, Rishabh. And I've never felt I'm talking to a much younger person, because I feel like my head and heart, I'm probably as young as you are.
Or younger.
Oh, yeah.
Well, or younger. Well, you've been dishing out content faster than a Shinkansen. And I say this because every time you open Amazon or Netflix or see any of the movies that are coming out, you'll see Dharma somewhere out there. And many kudos for producing so much of content. There's one more that's come out, and Karthik and Ananya are coming in the second half to talk about the film. Anything that you'd like to talk about the film?
It's a great, I think, happy, joyous love story that has color, and I think it's breaking the clutter right now as we speak.
Correct.
Because there's so much high energy testosterone, and this is a happy, bright, colorful season, very much a film to watch in the holidays.
They started discussing sorry to interrupt, I don't interrupt, but they started discussing the film as soon as you started talking about it.
Well, that's a good thing. As long as they go watch it on Christmas, I'm happy.
Are we going to go and watch it on Christmas? Fantastic. Well, the other thing that I want to understand from you is, after Rocky and Rani, when is Karan Johar coming back to the movies? When are you going to direct your next?
I'm writing as we speak, and I hope to be on sets end of 26. That's my plan.
And is there a small snippet or something that you can shed some light on? Because I know that a lot of your stories have to deal with young people, and you touch upon very many social subjects in your stories as well. So is that going to be a surprise that you're going to keep, or can you spill a few beans?
I'm not a surprising filmmaker. If you've seen my repertoire of work, I've never really surprised you. I pretty much have made the same film again and again. But what I am doing with this next film that I'm writing is in a sense, actually, when people associate that you make family films, I've actually made only one family film, which was my second feature film that I directed called Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham. After many years, I'm actually writing what I think is my take on a family film, but in today's climate. So that's what I'm doing. I'm not making a love story or it's a relationship drama, but it's embedded in the story of a family.
It's embedded in the family of, it's embedded in the story of a particular family.
Yes.
But all your films somehow vibe with the audience. And if you were to say that there is one thing that people should look out for in the film that you're coming up with in 2026, sorry to press you on this, but I'm trying to see whether we can get something out for them. In 26, if there is one thing that one can look for the movie that you are directing and writing.
Is the lens of how we look at parent-child relationship. I think when I made my second feature film, it was like, the tagline was, it's all about loving your parents. The gaze is now, it's all about understanding your children. And I think that's what I think parents need to also start doing.
To understand children more. And
I think we tend to, in our traditional and our fabric and our cultural DNA, we look up to our parents, as we must, because I believe in respect. But sometimes even parents actually might fumble, might fall, might fail. You know, they can also make mistakes.
Correct.
And sometimes they tend to kind of put the baggage of their incomplete dreams and aspirations on their children. And I believe that is a first error that parents make. You know, there are so many books about how do you raise good children. There are no books on how do you be a good parent, like yourself. And I feel like there need to be also lessons to parents about how they must also understand their children as much as their children must respect them.
And all students are nodding in unison.
Yeah.
But reverse mentoring is, of course, now a concept.
So I think that's the one thing that I want the film to kind of talk about is it's not just about respecting your elders. It's also for the elders to understand the mindset of their children much more than they actually do.
Understood. Yeah, that deserves a round of applause, of course. And before we let you go,
You're going to play rapid fire with me, aren't you?
Cliche, but
Yeah.
sorry, we'll have to do it.
Yes.
It's a small hamper also, not as big as yours.
Oh, okay.
Great. But what's the first thought that comes to mind when I say the following words?
Yeah.
When I say Riz.
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 Who has Riz?
Yeah,
Riz?
what the first thought? Yeah.
The
whatever.
first thought is Riz is charisma. Charisma is Shah Rukh Khan. Yeah.
When I say Delulu is not the Salulu.
Delulu is not the Sululu.
Sululu. Correct.
Every leading actor of any industry anywhere in the world. Delusion is a disease with no vaccination. And mostly, many actors have this problem.
When I say the word no cap.
No cap.
No cap. This is to check all the Gen Z lingo.
What does no cap mean?
No cap. No lying. Say things, no lying. Say things transparently. Be
Oh,
honest.
no cap. Acha, no filter.
No filter. Huh.
No filter.
Correct.
Who has no filter? Farah Khan. I don't know. She has no filter.
And the last three. When I say 6 and 7.
Oh. Listen, this I know because I have 2 9-year-olds at home. So one day I asked my son, why are you looking like this? He says, because I'm feeling 6, 7. So I was like, what do you mean you're feeling 6, 7? And then he explained the whole 6, 7 phenomena. And apparently you've got to say it like this.
Yes, yes.
See, some things I do know.
I think there is a lot that you know, and a lot more than what meets the eye when it comes to anything that is Karan Johar. But the last 2 words, one, when I say India, that is Bharat, what comes to mind?
I think when I hear that line, I mainly believe it's in the hands of the youth. The first thing that comes to my mind is youth, because I believe that they're leading the way. They're going to pave the way. So India, that is the new Bharat, is about the mindset of the generation that will take us into new ages and stages and successes and victories that I think India needs on a daily basis. And I feel it is therefore, I think youth, when I hear this line, I think nothing but the mindset of the youth.
And talking about young people and youth, this is, I've troubled you a lot in the last few years, and you've come to Ayaman quite a few times. When somebody were to come, if someone were to come up to you and say, IIMUN, or India's international movement to unite nations, what's the first thought that comes to your mind?
Is you.
Awesome.
Is you. You are, in many ways, at your age, and having started at the age that you did and having achieved what you have, to have created 15 years of Ayman, of actually 15 years of educational legacy, is everything. Because truly, if you are not educated, you are incomplete. So you, with what you do, is complete people. And that is a big gift in itself.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're only able to complete people because we have people like you and Justice Chandrachud who are guiding us and making things happen. And to that end, before we let you go, there are two requests that we have. One is it would be impolite on my part not to allow at least one of them to ask you a question.
Yes, absolutely.
So can we just get a couple of questions, sir, if you also don't mind? Yeah. Kushal, can we just pass on the mic to anybody that you'd like?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, so I'm Sanvi. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, Ayman, for talking to the Karan Johar. So, so you would expect me to ask you something about Bollywood, but first of all, I would like to compliment your outfit. I love it.
Oh,
So,
thank you. Thank you.
my question is, what is harder, directing a big film or choosing outfits for Coffee with Karan?
What do I enjoy more? Choosing outfits. No, that's a lie. No, choosing outfits comes easily to me. It's like, it's fine. I'm like obsessed with clothes, as you may have realized if anyone has watched my Instagram. That I do as a hobby. But directing a feature film is not just harder, but it's everything to me. It's my core passion. It's my primary passion. It's the reason that it's my life oxygen. So that is everything to me. Choosing outfits is what I do for fun.
But whatever you do, you slay in both of them. Like,
Thank
genuinely.
Slay.
You slay in whatever
I
you
slay.
do.
I
You
slay.
slay.
Thank you, darling. Thank you. That's so sweet.
But before we call it a day, there's also something small. I took one question. We've run out of time. We also have to be mindful of his schedule and that also of the next speaker. But before we let you go, there's something that we want to give to you, and it would be very kind of you to accept it and to, be a part of the larger ecosystem that we're trying to build. When I was in, and please allow me to say this for a minute, when I was in school, our teachers used to, I studied at Green Lawns where Karan went to school. Our Green Lawns used to, in Green Lawns, our principal used to give us an example quite often, saying, there's a boy called Karan Johar who used to sit exactly where you all are sitting, and then there used to be a long story that used to come after that. The same thing happened when I went to college at HR College, where our principal back then used to give me the same stories. So I've grown up literally listening to stories about him right from the time when I was in school and then in college. So for me, like I said at the very outset, you've seen me having conversations. We've had the good fortune of many people, but you saw the little bit of nervousness if you did. Was there a little bit of nervousness? No? Great. If there was none, then great. But the little bit of nervousness that was there from my end was for this one reason, that for me, he's a role model. So when we are making an organization go from the 14th year to the 15th year, we thought, what should we do in order to enhance this in a small way? And then we were very lucky because I wrote to him and requested him that we want to enhance it in a small way, but considering the fact that then he accepted it, I think we're going to be able to enhance it in a large way. IIMON has a small cohort of people who we continuously trouble. You know them fondly as advisors, and many of them have come to IIMON frequently and spoken, and also they humor me. There are people like Ajay Piramal sir, there's Deepak Parikh sir, the former chairman of HDFC, Nadir Godrej, the chairman of Godrej Group, and others from different fraternities like Shashi Tharoor from politics, Baman Irani from films, etc. So I said, if we have to have somebody who can steer and guide all of us into the 15th year and beyond, then I don't think that there is anybody better than the man who's sitting right next to us. So that's where I requested him, saying, would it be possible for you to humor me a little more than you do? And he was unabashedly unapologetic in saying this, quoting, using his words, saying, I would be more than happy to humor not just Rishabh, but the 3,500 and then the 100,000 schools that are part of the network. So it gives me great pleasure and a lot of privilege to be able to say that from this moment onwards, we have now as an integral part of the IIMN family, none other than Karan Johar.
Thank you so much, and I'm deeply honored that you asked me, and I'm very happy to be part of this organization, even in any capacity, tiny as it may be. Advisory is what you call it, but I think that just being part of something this large and this impressionable is really something that I look forward to.